Caleb Mercer had not touched a woman in 15 years. Not since the fever took his wife and left him alone on a mountain that did not care whether he lived or died. The Utah wind had become his only companion. Silence had wrapped around him like a second skin. And then, on a cold September afternoon in 1884, a woman with copper hair collapsed at his door and whispered words that split his world in two. "I'm your bride." But Caleb Mercer had never written for a bride. The morning it all began felt no different from the thousands before it. Caleb woke before dawn in the narrow bed he had slept in alone since 1869. The cabin was cold, the kind of mountain cold that crept into bone and memory. Frost traced thin white lines across the window glass. He could see his own breath in the dark. He swung his legs to the floor and stood without hesitation. Routine kept him steady. Routine kept grief from rising too close to the surface. He dressed in silence. The same faded shirt, the same worn trousers, the same boots with the heel that needed mending. He did not rush. There was nowhere to be except the pasture and back again. He built the fire in the iron stove with steady hands. Kindling first, then split logs. The smell of smoke filled the cabin. He poured water into the dented tin pot and waited for it to boil. Coffee came next, strong and bitter. He drank it standing at the window while the sky shifted from black to purple to pale gold over the Utah peaks. He did not think of Sarah. Not directly. That kind of thinking hurt too much. Instead, he counted cattle in his head. 12 head, 2 calves born in spring. A fence broken on the north line, roof leaking on the barn. Always work to be done. Work was better than remembering. He reached for his hat and stepped toward the door. That was when he heard it. A sound that did not belong. Wheels. Caleb froze with his hand on the latch. No one came up the mountain anymore, not since he had made it clear he wanted no visitors. The only man who had tried was Jonas Miller from Redemption, and Caleb had driven him off 2 years ago. The sound grew louder, wagon wheels grinding over ruts, a horse breathing hard. Caleb grabbed his Henry rifle from beside the door and stepped outside. The morning air was sharp. Frost covered the grass like scattered glass. And coming up the narrow trail toward his cabin was a passenger coach, not a supply wagon, not a rancher's cart. A passenger coach. And the horses were lathered with sweat. The driver looked tired enough to fall from his seat. He pulled the team to a stop in Caleb's yard and climbed down slowly. "This the Mercer place?" the driver called. Caleb kept the rifle low but visible. "Depends who's asking." "Got a delivery for Caleb Mercer. You him?" "I don't order deliveries." The driver gave a tired shrug and walked to the back of the coach. "Well, someone did. Paid good money, too. Chicago to here." Chicago. The driver opened the coach door and held out a hand. "Come on, miss. We're here." Caleb's breath caught. A pale hand appeared first, thin fingers gripping the driver's palm. Then a woman stepped down. She looked no older than her mid-20s. Her hair was copper red, pulled back in a loose bun that had mostly fallen apart during travel. The dust clung to her gray dress. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her green eyes were clear and stubborn. She stood in his yard like she had crossed the entire world to get there. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she took 2 shaky steps toward him. Her legs gave out. Caleb dropped the rifle and lunged forward just in time to catch her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, all bones and trembling breath. She smelled of dust and travel and something faintly floral. He had not held a woman in 15 years. The shock of it nearly made him pull away. "I'm sorry," she whispered weakly. I just... "You're about to fall," Caleb said roughly. "That's what you are." She tried to stand, but swayed again. He caught her a second time and did not let go. "Bring her things," Caleb told the driver. Inside the cabin, he laid her gently on the old sofa near the stove, the same sofa where Sarah once sat reading on winter nights. He pushed the thought away. The driver placed a small carpet bag and leather satchel by the door. "She's been traveling near a week," the man said. "Kept saying she had to reach the Mercer ranch. Had a letter." "A letter?" The driver handed him an envelope, worn from handling. Caleb's name was written across the front, in careful script. Not his handwriting. "She read it over and over," the driver added, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Caleb waited until the driver left before opening it. The words inside made his stomach turn cold. It was a proposal, written as if by him, signed with his name. What had invited a woman named Clara Whitfield from Chicago to travel west and become his wife. Caleb's hands tightened on the paper. He had written no such letter. Behind him, a soft voice spoke. "Is it really you?" He turned. The woman was sitting up now. Her eyes were fixed on him with desperate hope. "Are you Caleb Mercer?" "Yes," he said slowly. "But I did not write this." She stared at him like he had struck her. "My name is Clara Whitfield," she said. "You wrote to me. You said you wanted a wife. You said I would be treated with respect. I did not write that letter." Her face drained of color. "No," she whispered. "No, you have to be mistaken. I gave up everything. I sold what little I had. Her voice broke. "I cannot go back." Caleb saw something deeper than embarrassment in her eyes, not just disappointment. Fear. "Miss Whitfield," he said carefully. "Someone used my name. I do not know why." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I answered an advertisement. I needed to leave Chicago. Your letter was the only kind one. Kind." Caleb swallowed hard. He had not been kind in a long time. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. She blinked, confused by the question. "I cannot remember." He moved to the stove and began pulling out what little food he had. Bread, dried beef, preserves. He placed a plate in her hands. She ate slowly at first, then faster. He watched from across the room, uneasy at the sight of another living soul inside his cabin. After she finished, she looked at him again. "You could have turned me away," she said softly. "You collapsed in my yard," he replied. "Well, what kind of man would I be if I left you there?" She held his gaze. "The kind I am used to." He did not ask what she meant. "You can take the bed tonight," he said instead. "I will sleep out here." Her eyes widened. "I cannot take your bed." "You can, and you will." She hesitated, then nodded. The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. "Just for a few days," she said. "Please, let me rest. Then I will leave." He should have said no. Instead, he heard himself say, 3 days. Relief washed over her face. He showed her to the bedroom. She stepped inside quietly, as if afraid the walls might reject her. When the door closed, Caleb stood alone in the hallway, holding the forged letter. There was only one man who would have done this: Jonas Miller. Jonas had begged him for years to stop living like a ghost. It had said more than once that Caleb was wasting away on this mountain. Caleb clenched his jaw. "Damn you," he muttered. But anger did not change the fact that Clara Whitfield was now sleeping in his bed, exhausted and frightened, with nowhere else to go. That night, Caleb lay on the sofa staring at the ceiling. He listened to the soft sound of her breathing in the next room. The cabin felt different. Not quieter. Not louder. Just alive. The next morning, he woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, his heart stopped. It felt like stepping back 15 years. He sat up quickly. Clara stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair braided neatly. Sunlight fell across her copper hair like fire. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "You fed me. It seemed fair." He stared at her. No one had stood in his kitchen in 15 years. They ate together at the small table by the window. "I believe you," she said suddenly. "About what?" "That you did not write the letter." He exhaled slowly. "So where does that leave us?" he asked. Clara folded her hands. "I have a proposal." He raised an eyebrow. "Not marriage," she said quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "An arrangement. Let me stay 1 month. I will cook, clean, mend, help with the ranch. In exchange for shelter. Separate rooms. No expectations." He almost laughed. "A month?" She met his gaze steadily. "I cannot go back to Chicago. Please." There it was again, the fear. He studied her face. She was not foolish, not weak, just worn down. Finally, he nodded once. 1 month. But we ride into town tomorrow. I want answers." She let out a breath she had been holding. Agreed. He extended his hand. "Caleb." She took it. "Clara." Her fingers were warm in his, and for the first time in 15 years, Caleb Mercer did not feel entirely alone. The next morning dawned clear and sharp, the kind of mountain morning that showed no mercy to doubt. Caleb hitched the wagon in silence while Clara stood beside him, her hands folded tight in front of her. She looked pale, but steady. They rode down the mountain trail toward redemption, with the wind cutting across their faces. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. Clara watched the town grow closer with something that looked like dread. Redemption was small, only one long street lined with wood buildings, a church at one end, and a saloon at the other. Everyone noticed when a stranger arrived. They noticed Clara. Heads turned as Caleb drove into town. Whispers followed them like shadows. He pulled the wagon in front of Miller's Hardware. The sign above the door read, "Miller and Sons," though Jonas had no sons. Caleb climbed down first and helped Clara from the seat. She hesitated only a second before taking his hand. Inside the store, the smell of sawdust and oil filled the air. Jonas stood behind the counter, writing in a ledger. "You'll want to turn around," Caleb said. Jonas froze. Slowly he looked up. His eyes landed on Clara, then on Caleb. He sighed. "Ah, hell." "You wrote the letter," Caleb said flatly. Jonas rubbed his beard. "Yes." Clara stood very still beside Caleb. "You forged his name?" "I did." "Why?" Caleb demanded. Jonas stepped around the counter. "Because you've been dying up there, Caleb. 15 years of silence and ghosts. I was tired of watching you fade." "So you dragged a stranger across the country on a lie?" Jonas looked at Clara, and for the first time, there was regret in his eyes. "I read her letter to the agency. She was asking for a fresh start. Said she needed a decent man. You're decent, Caleb, whether you believe it or not." "You had no right," Caleb said. "Maybe not, but I'd do it again." Clara spoke quietly. "You used me." Jonas nodded. "I did, and I'm sorry for that, but I hoped you might save each other." The words hung in the air. Caleb felt anger, but underneath it was something else. At the truth that Clara had already changed his cabin in ways he did not want to admit. "We made an agreement," Clara said. 1 month. I help at the ranch." Jonas looked surprised. "You're staying?" "For now." Jonas studied Caleb. "And you're allowing it?" "It's none of your concern." Jonas held up his hands. "All right. I won't interfere again." But as Caleb turned to leave, Jonas added softly, "You don't look like a dying man anymore." Caleb did not answer. Outside, Clara climbed back into the wagon. The whispers followed them again as they drove away. "People are staring," she said. "Let them. They think I'm something improper. They think too much." She looked at him. "Does it bother you?" No. That was not entirely true. Back at the ranch, they fell into a routine. Clara woke early and made coffee, and she cleaned corners Caleb had stopped seeing. She mended shirts that had been frayed for years. She scrubbed the floors until the wood showed its grain again. Outside, Caleb worked the fence while she brought him water in the afternoons. "You do not have to work so hard," he told her one day. "I do," she replied. "If I am not useful, what am I? You are not here to earn your existence." She looked at him strangely. "That is not how the world works. It is how this ranch works." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky burned orange and purple. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "It is. You've been alone here all this time." "Yes." "Did it make the pain easier?" Caleb thought about Sarah's last breath, about the empty bed. "No," he said honestly. It just made it quiet." Clara nodded slowly. "Sometimes quiet can be worse." Days passed, then weeks. Clara's presence settled into the cabin like light through a window. She laughed when the chickens chased her. She hummed while she cooked. She asked questions about the cattle and listened to his answers. And Caleb found himself talking more than he had in years. One evening by the fire, Clara finally told him about Chicago. "There was a man," she said, staring into the flames. "His name was William Garrett. He owned the boarding house where I worked." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He promised marriage," she continued. "Said he loved me. I believed him. And he was married." "Yes." Her voice did not shake. It was steady, like she had repeated this story too many times to herself. When his wife discovered the truth, she made sure everyone knew. I lost my job, my room, my name. No one would hire me. Caleb felt anger rise inside him. "He said if I stayed quiet, he would take care of me," Clara said bitterly. "But I would have been hidden, owned. And you refused." "Yes." She looked at him then, eyes bright with pain. "That is why I needed to leave Chicago. That is why I answered the advertisement. I thought I could start over somewhere no one knew me. And instead, you found a man who did not write the letter." She gave a small smile. "Yes. Instead, I found you." Silence filled the room. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Not yet. That answer stayed with him. As the month drew closer to its end, the air between them changed. Small touches lingered longer. Their hands brushed over the same tools. Their shoulders bumped in narrow doorways. One night in the barn, Clara struggled to lift a saddle. Caleb took it from her. "You do not have to prove yourself every moment." "I am not proving myself," she said quickly. Then softer. "Maybe I am." He stepped closer. "You are not a burden." She met his eyes. "You are counting the days." He froze. "I was," he admitted. "At first. And now?" He hesitated. "Now, I am not sure I want you to leave." The words settled between them like something fragile. Clara's breath caught. "You do not mean that." "I do." Her eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. "Caleb, I cannot survive hoping for something that will be taken away." He understood that fear. "Then do not hope," he said quietly. "Just stay." For what? For this. He did not know how else to name it. That night, sitting by the fire, and the truth finally broke free. "I love you," Caleb said, the words rough and unfamiliar. Clara stared at him. "You do not have to say it back," he added quickly. "But it is true." She stepped toward him and pressed her hands to his chest. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was just afraid to admit it." He kissed her then, slow at first, careful. 15 years of loneliness and 1 month of growing closeness met in that single moment. When they pulled apart, everything had changed, but the mountain did not allow peace for long. 3 days later, riders came. Caleb saw them from the yard. 3 men with hard faces and colder eyes. The leader stepped forward. "We're looking for a woman from Chicago. Red hair, green eyes." Caleb's hand went to his rifle. "Never heard of her." The man smiled. "Her name is Clara Whitfield. She stole from her employer. $10,000 in jewelry." Clara stepped out of the cabin behind Caleb. "I stole nothing," she said. The man tipped his hat. "Mr. Garrett says otherwise." The name hit like a gunshot. "You tell Mr. Garrett I am not coming back," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "He's coming himself," the man replied. "With papers." They rode off, leaving dust and threat behind. Clara's knees weakened. Caleb caught her. He found me," she whispered. He looked toward the trail, jaw tight. "Let him come," Caleb said. "This time, you are not alone." Garrett arrived 3 days later in a polished black coach that did not belong in a town like Redemption. The horses were tall and groomed. The brass on the carriage shone in the sun. He stepped down dressed in a fine suit, boots without dust, hair slicked back like he had never known hardship. He looked like success. He looked like power. And when his eyes found Clara standing beside Caleb outside the sheriff's office, he smiled like he had already won. "Clara," he said smoothly, as if greeting an old friend. "You look well." Clara's hand tightened around Caleb's. "I am Mrs. Mercer now," she replied. Garrett's smile flickered for only a second before returning. "Of course, a quick marriage. How convenient." Sheriff Brennan stood at the doorway holding a folder of documents. His expression was troubled. "He's filed formal charges," the sheriff said quietly. "The warrant is valid." Caleb's chest burned. "On what proof?" "Sworn statements," Garrett answered calmly. "Witnesses who saw Clara taking money and jewelry before she fled Chicago." "It's a lie," Clara said. Garrett stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Return what you stole, and I will make this disappear. Come back with me, quietly." "I took nothing," Clara repeated, "and I would rather die than belong to you." Garrett's eyes hardened. "Sheriff," he said coolly, "please." Brennan swallowed. "Clara Mercer, I have to place you under arrest, pending the judge's arrival." The sound of metal around her wrists made Caleb see red. "You will not take her," he said. Clara turned to him, tears in her eyes, but her voice steady. "Let them. We fight this the right way." He wanted to refuse, wanted to break the handcuffs and drag her back to the mountain. But she nodded once, asking for trust. So he stepped aside. They locked her in the small-town jail, while Garrett watched with satisfaction. 3 days, the sheriff told Caleb. "The circuit judge arrives then. 3 days. 3 days felt like a lifetime. Caleb did not leave town. He sat outside Clara's cell for hours, holding her hand through the bars. "We will find a way," he promised. "There is a way," Clara whispered on the second night. "I did not tell you everything." She told him then about Thomas, about the man she had loved before Garrett destroyed his work and drove him from Chicago, About the papers Thomas had copied that proved Garrett had been stealing money from the boarding house owner for years. "I gave those papers to a nun," Clara said. "Sister Mary Catherine. She believed me. She kept them safe." Caleb's heart pounded. "If we get those papers, we can expose him. He will try to stop it. Then we move faster." That night, Caleb sent a telegram to Chicago. The reply came the next afternoon. "Documents are on the way. Arriving tomorrow. Trust in God." Garrett must have sensed something was wrong. That evening, while Clara was being held at the hotel under watch, a bottle filled with kerosene crashed through the window of her room. Fire swallowed the curtains in seconds. Caleb had been outside speaking with Jonas when he heard the glass shatter. He ran. Smoke poured from the window. Flames licked across the walls. He did not think. He kicked in the door and rushed inside. Clara was coughing, disoriented, trapped between fire and smoke. He wrapped his coat around her and dragged her toward the hallway. The ceiling beam cracked. For a moment he thought they would both die there. Then hands grabbed them from behind. Jonas and two ranch hands pulled them into the street just as the roof collapsed. The hotel burned against the night sky while the town formed a bucket line. Garrett was gone. Dutch and his men were gone. "They knew the evidence was coming," Jonas said, soot streaking his face. "This was their last move." Clara clung to Caleb, shaking. "He will never stop," she whispered. "He will," Caleb said quietly. "Because tomorrow we end it." The next morning, Sister Mary Catherine arrived in a plain wagon, dust on her black habit, but fire in her eyes. She carried a leather case. Inside were ledgers, copied letters, bank statements, proof of embezzlement, proof of stolen funds, proof that Garrett had been bleeding his employer dry for 5 years. Sheriff Brennan examined the documents in stunned silence. "This is enough," he said finally. "More than enough." The circuit judge arrived that afternoon. Garrett returned too, as if confident his charm would smooth everything over. But when the evidence was placed before the judge, when Sister Mary Catherine testified, when Caleb and Clara stood side by side and told the full truth, the mask fell from Garrett's face. The judge's voice echoed in the small courtroom. "All charges against Clara Mercer are dismissed." Clara's knees nearly gave out from relief. The judge continued, "And based on the evidence presented, a warrant will be issued for William Garrett on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted arson." Garrett's composure shattered. "This is absurd," he shouted. "She is lying. They are lying." But no one was listening anymore. Dutch tried to slip out the back door. Sheriff Brennan and 2 deputies blocked the exit. Garrett was placed in irons in the same room where Clara had stood days earlier. As he was led past her, his eyes burned with hatred. "You think this is victory?" he hissed. "You will regret crossing me." Clara lifted her chin. "I stopped being afraid of you the day I left Chicago." He was taken away under guard, bound for trial. But the town exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. Redemption chose its side. Mrs. Henderson hugged Clara in the street. Jonas clapped Caleb on the back, hard enough to bruise him. "You stubborn fool," Jonas said with a grin. "Told you she'd save you." Clara looked at Caleb through tears and laughter mixed together. "We did this," she said. "Together." They rode back to the ranch that evening as husband and wife in truth, not just in words. The mountains looked different somehow, less like a prison, more like home. Weeks passed. Garrett was convicted in Chicago. Word reached Redemption that he would spend many years in prison. The threat was over. Peace came slowly, like spring after a harsh winter. Clara's sewing business grew. Women from town brought dresses and coats to the ranch, while children ran across the yard when they came to visit. The cabin no longer echoed with silence. Laughter filled it. One morning, nearly a year later, Clara stood at the window again. But this time, her hand rested over her stomach. Caleb noticed the glow in her face before she even spoke. "We're going to have a child," she said softly. For a moment, he could not breathe. 15 years of emptiness collapsed under the weight of that single sentence. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. "I thought I had lost everything," he whispered against her hair. "But I was only waiting for you." She smiled up at him, eyes shining. "And I thought I was ruined," she said. "But I was only lost." Outside, the Utah wind moved gently through the grass. The fence had been mended. The barn roof no longer leaked. And inside the once lonely cabin, a man who had not touched a woman in 15 years held his wife close and felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Their story had begun with a lie, but it had ended with truth, with love, and with a future neither of them had believed possible. And on that mountain where silence once ruled, the sound of laughter carried farther than the wind.